Dr. Emily Brooks hadn't meant to make history on a Tuesday night. She'd only come back to the monitoring station because she'd forgotten her favorite coffee mug, the one her daughter had painted with wobbly stars and planets. The Nevada Deep Space Monitoring Station was almost deserted at this hour, most of the day shift having headed home to their families or to the bars in Carson City. The facility was considered something of a joke among the scientific community, ever since humanity had discovered quantum entanglement communications 5 years ago. Listening for radio signals from space seemed as outdated as searching for smoke signals. The station had avoided shutdown only because of some obscure federal mandate about maintaining backup communication systems. Emily paused at her workstation, noting that someone had left the ancient radio telescope array online again. She reached for the shutdown sequence, then froze as her coffee rippled in its mug. At first, she thought it was just the building's ventilation system, but the vibration had a pattern to it. Deliberate, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, she whispered, quickly pulling up the signal analysis on her holoscreen. The data streamed across her display, familiar yet alien. While most of her colleagues had retrained in quantum communications, Emily had spent years studying xenolinguistics, particularly the neural patterns of different species' distress calls. There was something about this signal that nagged at her deepest instincts. She began running it through various filters, comparing it to her database of known patterns. The signal was using amplitude modulation, technology that even humans had largely abandoned centuries ago. But beneath that primitive carrier wave was something extraordinary, mathematical sequences that matched the neural patterns of juvenile distress calls across multiple species. "Computer, when did this signal first appear?" she asked, her heart racing. "Signal first detected 47 minutes ago. Automated systems classified it as space debris interference. Would you like to confirm this classification?" Emily's fingers flew across the haptic interface. The more she analyzed the signal, the more certain she became. This wasn't random noise or space debris. This was a child, somewhere out there in the vast darkness between stars, crying for help in the most basic way possible. She hit the emergency protocol button, knowing full well what would happen next. Within minutes, Dr. James Morrison, the station director, stormed in, still wearing his dinner jacket. "Brooks, do you have any idea what time it is? This better be." "Listen," she interrupted, projecting the signal through the room's acoustic system. The pulsing filled the space, making the coffee in her mug dance. "Those patterns, they're consistent with distress signals from juvenile neural networks across 12 different species. Someone out there is deliberately broadcasting on AM frequencies, using mathematics as a universal translator." Morrison frowned, adjusting his glasses. "Even if you're right, and that's a big if, no advanced civilization would use radio waves. It's too primitive, too slow." "Exactly," Emily said, pulling up her analysis. "What if they're not using it because it's all they have? What if they're using it because they know someone might still be listening? We're one of the only civilizations that still maintains radio telescopes. Maybe that's not a weakness. Maybe that's the point." She could see the conflict in Morrison's eyes. If she was wrong, reporting this would make the station a laughingstock. If she was right, and they ignored it. "We shut down the quantum arrays because of the cost," Morrison said quietly. "No one else is listening to these frequencies anymore. If this is really a distress signal, then we might be their only hope," Emily finished. She thought of her daughter's coffee mug, of a child's attempt to paint the stars. Somewhere out there, someone else's child was crying out into the darkness. "We have to try." Morrison was silent for a long moment, then reached for the secure line to the Space Force Command. "God help us if you're wrong about this, Brooks." Emily looked back at her readings, at the pulsing signal that seemed to echo like a heartbeat through the empty station. "God help us if I'm right." The U.S. horizon cut through the darkness of space like a blade, its experimental fusion drive pushing the limits of human engineering. Captain Jack Turner stood at the bridge window, watching the unfamiliar stars streak by. 3 days ago, He'd been preparing for routine patrol duty. Now he was leading humanity's first interstellar rescue mission. "Signal's getting stronger, Captain," Emily reported from her station, dark circles under her eyes from 3 days without proper sleep. "But there's something else. Radiation readings from the coordinates are off the charts." Turner's jaw tightened. He'd lost his daughter Jenny in a radiation leak on Mars 2 years ago. The memory of her final transmission still haunted his dreams. "Show me." The holographic display flickered to life, showing a barren moon orbiting a gas giant. The surface was riddled with abandoned mining equipment, reminiscent of the early Mars colonies. But it was the energy readings that made Turner's blood run cold. Those levels would kill an unshielded human in minutes, Lieutenant Sarah Hayes, their medical officer, said quietly. "Whatever's down there is still broadcasting," Emily interrupted. "And the signal's getting weaker." Turner made his decision. "Hayes, prep the radiation suits. Rodriguez, bring us into orbit. Brooks, you're with me on the landing team." He paused, looking at each crew member. "I know this isn't what any of you signed up for, but there's someone down there who needs help. Everything else is secondary." The descent through the moon's thin atmosphere was rough, their shuttle bucking against magnetic interference that played havoc with their instruments. Through gaps in the sulfurous clouds, they could see the sprawling mining complex below, its structures half buried in metallic dust. "Energy signature strongest in the central facility," Rodriguez reported, fighting with the controls. "But these readings, sir, I don't think we're dealing with any life form we've encountered before." They landed hard, the shuttle's struts groaning in protest. The rescue team moved out in their radiation suits, the brilliant light of the gas giant casting everything in an eerie purple glow. Emily's handheld scanner led them deeper into the facility, following the pulsing signal that had brought them across the stars. The first chamber they entered stopped them in their tracks. Pools of liquid metal lined the walls, and floating in them were crystalline formations that caught and refracted the light in impossible ways. Most were dark, but one, smaller than the others, still glowed with a weak inner light. "It's beautiful," Emily whispered, approaching the glowing crystal. Her radiation meter was screaming, but the crystal seemed to pulse in time with her approach. "This is our broadcaster. The signal matches perfectly." Turner stepped closer, his suit's sensors struggling to analyze the crystal's composition. "Some kind of silicon-based life form. Hayes." "Signs of organized energy patterns," Hayes reported, scanning the crystal. "Similar to neural activity. But, sir, I think this is a child." The size and energy patterns suggest juvenile development. The crystal's glow flickered, weakening. Around them, they could see other crystals in the pools. Adult specimens, Turner realized. Their light almost completely faded. "The radiation," Emily said suddenly. "It's not a danger to them. It's food. These pools must regulate it somehow, but the system's failing. They're starving." As if in response, the juvenile crystal pulsed brightly, its pattern matching the radio signal they'd followed. Turner watched it flash, and knew, with a certainty that transcended species, that he was watching a child cry out for help. "Brooks, interface with the facility systems. Hayes, analyze those pools. Figure out what they need. Rodriguez, get back to the ship and prep our radiation shielding for conversion. We didn't come this far to watch them die." The crystal's light dimmed again, but as the team rushed to work, it began to pulse in a new pattern. Emily's translator picked it up first, a simple mathematical sequence, repeating over and over. It took them a moment to realize what they were seeing. The crystal was trying to say thank you in base mathematics. "Hold on, little one," Turner whispered, remembering another child he couldn't save. "We're not going anywhere." "Captain, 3 ships just dropped out of quantum space." Rodriguez's voice crackled through the facility's communication system. "Their energy signatures, their council vessels." Turner looked up from where he and Hayes were rigging a makeshift radiation amplifier. In the 6 hours since they'd landed, they'd managed to stabilize 2 of the adult crystals, But the juvenile's energy was still fluctuating dangerously. "Open a channel," Turner ordered, then paused as Emily grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said, her face pale behind her suit's visor. "I'm picking up their internal communications. They're not here to help." The transmission played through their suit speakers, translated in real time. The artificial voice couldn't hide the contempt in the council representative's words. "Human vessel, you are interfering with a designated extinction event. This Ktheri mining colony was deemed economically inefficient for preservation 3 standard cycles ago. Withdraw immediately." Turner felt his blood run cold. "Designated extinction event. Hayes, what's the status of our patients?" "The adults are starting to respond to the radiation therapy," Hayes reported, her hand steady as she adjusted the equipment. "But the child, sir, its core temperature is still dropping. We need at least 4 more hours." Emily's translator pinged again. "Captain, they're moving into attack positions. They're serious about stopping us." Turner looked at the crystalline beings they'd been fighting to save. The juvenile. They'd started calling it Nova. Pulsed weakly, its light dimming further with each passing minute. He thought of the 3 council ships that had passed by before, logging these deaths as a business decision. "Rodriguez, status of our shields." "They'd got us outgunned 50-1, sir. 1 hit from their quantum weapons would." "That's not what I asked, Lieutenant." A pause. "Shields are holding at 87%. Their quantum interference isn't playing nice with our primitive technology." Turner smiled grimly. Sometimes being behind the technological curve had its advantages. "Keep the shields up. Brooks, can you boost Nova's signal? Let's show the council exactly what they're trying to stop." Emily nodded, quickly modifying their transmitters. Nova's distress signal broadcast again, but this time they added visual data. The crystal's desperate pulses, its weakening light, the mathematical thank you it kept trying to send. "Council vessels," Turner transmitted, his voice steady. "This is Captain Jack Turner of the U.S. Horizon. We have clear evidence that you deliberately ignored the distress calls of sentient beings, including a child. Under Section 7 of the Galactic Charter regarding the preservation of sapient life, we are executing an emergency rescue operation. Any interference will be considered a direct violation of Charter law." "You quote laws you barely understand, human," the council representative replied. "The Ktheri are a failing species. Their inability to maintain their own habitats proves their unworthiness for continuation. Stand down, or we will be forced to." The transmission cut off as Nova suddenly flared with brilliant light. The crystal's surface rippled, and for a moment, the entire chamber filled with a holographic display. Perfect crystalline memories of the council ships passing by, ignoring their calls for help, condemning them to die for the crime of being inefficient. "Sir," Rodriguez's voice was tight with urgency. "They're charging weapons." Turner looked at Nova, at the brave child who had refused to give up, who had found a way to call for help when its own people couldn't, who had trusted that somewhere out there, someone would still be listening to the old frequencies. "Maintain position, Lieutenant. Hayes, how much longer for the radiation therapy?" 3 hours minimum. "Sir, but with their interference." "Then we have 3 hours to remind the Galactic Council what civilization actually means." Turner turned to Emily. "Dr. Brooks, send everything we have. Nova's signal, the Council's threats, all of it. Broadcast on every frequency we've got. Let's see how many other primitive species are still listening to the old channels." The Council ships loomed above them, their quantum weapons charging. But in the chamber below, a child's crystal light pulsed stronger, refusing to fade into economic insignificance. And around it, a handful of humans stood their ground, armed with nothing but outdated technology and the simple belief that no child should cry out for help in vain. Chief Engineer Kelly Thompson had always believed the old saying that necessity was the mother of invention. Right now, with 3 council warships bearing down on them, necessity was starting to feel more like a demanding parent with impossible expectations. "The good news," she announced, crawling out from under a jury-rigged collection of mining equipment and ship parts, "is that their quantum interference actually helped me solve our power problem." Her face and uniform were streaked with metallic dust from the facility's machinery. "And the bad news?" Turner asked, helping her up. "The solution might kill us all if I'm off by a decimal point." She gestured to her creation, a maze of old mining lasers connected to their shuttle's fusion core through a series of radiation-modified crystalline conductors. "But since we're dead anyway, if we do nothing." The Council ships had maintained their attack position for the past hour, their quantum fields disrupting any advanced technology within the facility. What they hadn't counted on was humanity's stubborn refusal to completely upgrade their equipment. When the quantum interference had knocked out their modern medical devices, Thompson had spotted an opportunity in the ancient mining equipment scattered throughout the facility. "Talk to me, Kelly. What are we looking at?" "Their quantum field is creating excess radiation as a byproduct," Thompson explained, bringing up a holographic diagram powered by hand-crank generators. "They think it's destroying our ability to help the Scathuri, but with these modified mining lasers, we can actually channel it directly into the crystal's growth chambers." Nova pulsed weakly from its pool, its light synchronizing with the diagram's rotation. The Yum crystal had been helping them understand its species' needs through mathematical patterns and crystalline memory projections. Together, they'd learned more about Scathuri biology in 3 hours than the Council had bothered to learn in centuries. "The Scathuri don't just feed on radiation," Emily added, her eyes bright with revelation. "They shape it, store it, transform it. That's how their memory storage works. Nova's been teaching us, showing us how to modify these tools to match their natural processes." Hayes checked her readings. "The adults are stabilizing, but Nova's core temperature is still critical. We need more power." "Which brings us to the potentially explosive part of my solution," Thompson said, adjusting her makeshift controls. "Those mining lasers were designed to cut through crystal deposits. If we reverse their polarity and filter the beam through these crystalline conductors Nova helped us modify, we can transform the Council's attack into exactly the kind of energy the Scathuri need." Turner finished, beginning to smile. "They're not just trying to shut us down. They're feeding our patience," Thompson confirmed. "They just don't know it yet." The facility shuddered as another quantum pulse hit their shields. Rodriguez's voice crackled through their emergency radio. "Whatever you're going to do it fast. Shields at 43% and dropping." Turner looked at his team, then at Nova, whose light flickered like a guttering candle. "Kelly, Emily, do it. Hayes, monitor their vitals. If anything spikes, we pull the plug immediately." Thompson's hands flew over the controls, synchronizing the mining lasers with the quantum pulses hammering their shields. Emily fed Nova's mathematical patterns into the targeting system, using the Yum crystal's own understanding of radiation dynamics to fine-tune the process. The chamber filled with prismatic light as the first converted pulse struck the pools. Nova's crystal structure began to glow brighter, refracting the energy in complex patterns across the ceiling. The adult Scathuri stirred in their pools, their own crystals beginning to resonate with the transformed energy. "It's working," Hayes exclaimed. "Core temperatures rising across the board. Nova's stabilizing." Another blast rocked the facility. Thompson gripped her controls tighter, grinning fiercely. "That's right, you quantum-equipped snobs. Keep trying to shut us down. Give us everything you've got." Above them, the Council ships continued their assault, unaware that every attack was being transformed by human ingenuity and Scathuri knowledge into the very thing needed to save the dying crystal beings. Nova's light grew stronger with each pulse, its pattern shifting from distress to something new, a crystal song of triumph, created by two species learning to shine together in the darkness. The first sign that something was wrong came when Hayes collapsed. The medical officer had been checking Nova's vital signs when her radiation suit's alarm began screaming. Turner caught her before she hit the ground, seeing the radiation burns already spreading across her face through the cracked visor. "Multiple suit breaches," Thompson shouted, checking her own indicators. "The converted energy is too strong. It's eating through our shielding." They'd been so focused on saving the Scatheri that they'd overlooked a crucial detail. Their radiation suits weren't designed to handle this much concentrated energy for extended periods. The Council's continued assault had given them the power they needed to save the crystals, but it was slowly killing the rescue team. "Get her to the shuttle," Turner ordered, helping Hayes up. But she pushed him away weakly. "Can't move her now," Hayes gasped, gesturing at her equipment. "Nova's at critical stage. Need to maintain levels." Emily rushed to check Hayes's readings, her own suit's warning lights beginning to flash. "Captain, she's right. If we interrupt the treatment now." Nova's crystal structure pulsed with increasing brightness, but there was something different about the pattern now. The young crystal's light seemed to bend around Hayes, forming a prismatic shield between her and the worst of the radiation. "Impossible," Thompson whispered, checking her instruments. "It's redirecting the energy flow, creating safe zones in the radiation field." Turner watched in amazement as Nova's protective barrier expanded, its crystalline matrix growing to encompass the entire team. The young Scatheri was using its own developing body as a radiation shield, protecting the humans who had risked everything to save it. "The crystal memories," Emily said suddenly, her voice filled with wonder. "They don't just store information. They learn from it. Nova's been studying our biology through our interactions, figuring out what hurts us, what we can tolerate." Hayes's medical scanner beeped insistently. The adult Scatheri were fully awake now, their massive crystal structures humming with restored energy. But instead of pulling away from the strange organic beings in their midst, they began to resonate with Nova's frequency, strengthening the protective barrier. "Rodriguez to ground team," their radio crackled. "Whatever you're doing down there is lighting up my sensors like a supernova. But we've got another problem." Council reinforcements just dropped out of quantum space. 6 more ships, heavy cruiser class. Turner looked at his team, Hayes barely conscious but still monitoring Nova's progress, Thompson running on stims and determination, Emily working to translate the increasingly complex crystal patterns. They were all showing signs of radiation exposure despite Nova's protection. They couldn't take much more. But then Nova's light shifted again, and new images filled the chamber, crystalline memories playing out in real time. They saw themselves through the young crystal's perception, beings of warm light and electric neural patterns rushing across space to answer a cry for help. They saw their own determination reflected and magnified through the perfect memory of a child who had never lost faith that someone would come. The adult Scatheri added their own memories to the display, centuries of council neglect, of being treated as resources rather than beings, of watching other inefficient species fade into extinction. But now they also shared something new. The moment when humanity proved that intelligence and worth couldn't be measured in technological advancement alone. "Captain," Thompson said quietly, checking their systems, "if we stay to finish the treatment, we may not have enough power left to break orbit. And with those reinforcements coming." Turner watched Nova's light dance across Hayes's burns, trying to heal what it could, protecting them even as they protected it. He thought of all the times advanced civilizations must have passed this place by, deciding that crystals in a failing mine weren't worth saving. "Send a message to the council ships," he ordered. "Tell them that if they want to stop this rescue, they'll have to come down here and see exactly who they're trying to kill. Let's make them look their economic inefficiency in the eye." Above them, 9 quantum-armed warships prepared to fire, but in the chamber below, 2 species stood together, each using their own forms of light to hold back the darkness. The first response came from a small mining colony in the Carina Nebula, a simple radio signal, transmitted on the same frequency Nova had used. Then another from the Pleiades cluster. Within hours, the ancient radio frequencies that humanity had never quite abandoned began to light up across the galaxy. Emily's translation matrix struggled to keep up with the flood of messages. They're all saying the same thing, Captain. We hear you. We see you. We stand with you. Turner watched from the facility's observation deck as more ships appeared at the edge of the system. Not council vessels with their quantum drives and energy weapons, but smaller ships, older ships, vessels belonging to species that the council had deemed too primitive or inefficient to matter. Sir, Rodriguez reported from the horizon, I'm counting 37 ships in near orbit. Most of them are running on fusion drives like ours. They're forming a defensive line between us and the council fleet. Nova's crystal structure had nearly doubled in size over the past hours, its light now steady and strong. The young Scatheri had maintained its protective barrier around the human team even as it grew, the complex lattice of its being inscribed with the perfect memory of everything that had happened. The council's broadcasting on all frequencies, Thompson said from her makeshift control station. Despite her radiation burns, she'd refused to leave her post. They're demanding that the primitive species coalition stand down. Through the observation window, they could see the council warship's quantum fields flickering with barely contained power. 9 of the most advanced ships in the galaxy, facing off against a makeshift fleet of vessels that most advanced civilizations would consider worthy only of museums. Nova's transmitting, Emily announced suddenly. But this is different. The pattern. The chamber filled with crystalline light as Nova began to share its memories, not just with them this way, but broadcasting on all frequencies, using the same simple radio waves that had carried its distress call. Through the perfect recall of the crystal structure, every species in the system watched as the council ships ignored the Scatheri's pleas for help. They saw Hayes risking her life to stabilize the failing crystals, Thompson creating her jury-rigged energy converter, Emily working to translate and understand. But more than that, they saw themselves. All the primitive species that had been pushed aside, deemed inefficient, left to struggle with their outdated technology, while the council races soared past in their quantum ships. They saw their own stories reflected in Nova's memory, their own calls for help ignored by those who considered themselves too advanced to look backward. Multiple ships launching from the surface of the gas giant's other moons, Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with excitement. Hundreds of them. Small mining vessels, maintenance craft. Sir, they're all broadcasting on Nova's frequency. Through the crystal memories, they learned the truth. This sector of space was full of primitive species, hiding in the shadows of the gas giant's radiation fields, surviving on the edges of council space. Species that still used radio waves, that still listened to the frequencies the advanced races had abandoned. Species that had heard every moment of humanity's desperate rescue attempt. Incoming transmission from the council flagship, Thompson announced. They're asking to send a diplomatic party to the surface. Turner looked at Nova, whose light now filled the chamber with shifting patterns of gold and blue. The young crystal had grown so much in such a short time, not just in size but in understanding. It had learned from humanity's example that sometimes the most powerful act wasn't advancing beyond others, but reaching back to help them up. Tell them they're welcome to land, Turner said, watching as more ships joined the defensive line above. But they'll have to use our old-fashioned docking protocols. Their quantum technology might be a bit too inefficient for this situation. As the message was sent, Nova's light pulsed with what they had all learned to recognize as laughter. Above them, hundreds of primitive ships held position against the Council's advanced fleet, their radio frequencies alive with the voices of species that had been silent for too long. Sometimes, it seemed, the most important frequencies were the ones that everyone else had forgotten to monitor. The Council representatives arrived in a shuttle that looked almost offensively pristine next to the radiation-scarred rescue vessels. 3 tall, silvery beings emerged, their quantum-enhanced environmental suits glowing with barely contained energy. They stopped short at the sight of Hayes, still monitoring Nova's readings despite her radiation burns, and Thompson, whose makeshift control station now incorporated parts from a dozen different species technologies. "This is highly irregular," the lead council member declared, his translator producing perfect, emotionless standard. "You have incited rebellion among multiple protectorate species, violated quantum space regulations, and disrupted designated economic protocols." "We saved a child," Turner replied simply. As if in response, Nova's crystal structure pulsed brightly, projecting the entire rescue in crystalline detail around them. Every decision, every moment of cooperation, every instance of primitive ingenuity defeating advanced indifference played out in perfect clarity. The council members watched in rigid silence as their own ships appeared in the projection, passing by the dying Sktheri without pause. Their carefully crafted image of benevolent oversight cracked further as Nova shared memories from the other species now gathered in orbit, decades of ignored distress calls, of communities deemed too inefficient to save, of civilizations forced to hide their true capabilities to avoid council optimization. "These are concerning allegations," the second council member said carefully. "But the Galactic Council maintains the highest standards of what?" Emily interrupted, her voice sharp despite her exhaustion. "Of progress. Of civilization." She gestured to the chambers where the adult Sktheri now floated, their crystals humming with restored energy. They developed a form of memory storage so perfect it can transmit emotions across species boundaries. They found a way to shape radiation itself, but because they didn't package it in quantum technology, you decided they weren't worth saving. Nova's light shifted, and new images filled the chamber. Not memories this time, but real-time transmissions from the ships above. Dozens of species were sharing their own stories, their own innovations, their own ways of surviving and thriving without quantum technology. A tapestry of primitive ingenuity that had flourished in the shadows of the Council's neglect. "This is a violation of Council information protocols," the third representative began, but stopped as Hayes's medical scanner beeped insistently. "No," Hayes said, her voice weak but determined. "This is what civilization actually looks like." She held up her scanner, showing readings that made the council members step back in surprise. "While you were talking, 3 different species figured out how to combine their technologies to heal radiation damage. 2 more are adapting our energy converter design for their own rescue operations. They're not asking permission to innovate anymore. They're just doing it." The chamber rumbled as another ship landed outside, this one bearing the marks of a mining colony from the outer rim. Its crew had already begun integrating their drilling equipment with Thompson's energy conversion system, improving its efficiency by 40%. "The Council exists to maintain order," the lead representative insisted, "to ensure proper technological progression. The Council exists to help people," Turner cut in. "Or at least it should. Look around you. Look at what happens when species work together instead of being ranked and classified. Look at what your primitive protectorates have accomplished in just a few hours of actual cooperation." Nova pulsed again, its light forming a bridge between humans and council members. Through the crystal's perfect memory, the representatives felt what the young Sktheri had felt: the despair of being abandoned, the joy of being heard, the wonder of discovering that technological advancement and civilization weren't always the same thing. The lead representative hesitated, his artificial certainty cracking. "We will need to convene an emergency session of the full council." "Good," Turner said, watching as more ships descended through the moon's atmosphere, each bringing new ideas, new technologies, new ways of solving old problems. "Because I think you're about to hear from a lot of species you thought weren't worth listening to." Above them, the quantum fields of the council warships flickered uncertainly as hundreds of primitive vessels held their position, their old radio frequencies alive with the sound of a revolution that had begun with a child's cry for help. 5 years after a desperate radio signal reached Earth, Dr. Emily Brooks stood in the newly constructed Galactic Cooperation Center in Nevada, just a few miles from the monitoring station, where she'd first heard Nova's cry for help. The building was a testament to the changes that had swept through the galaxy. Its architecture combining elements from dozens of species, its technology a harmonious blend of quantum computing and primitive ingenuity. Nova, now fully grown into a towering crystalline structure that served as both embassy and memory archive, filled the central chamber with prismatic light. The young Scatheri, who had once broadcast a desperate plea on abandoned radio frequencies, had become a symbol of transformation throughout known space. "Ready for the ceremony?" Turner asked, approaching with Hayes and Thompson. His captain's uniform now bore the insignia of the Interstellar Rescue Service, an organization that had grown from their single desperate mission into a galaxy-wide network of mutual aid. Hayes, her radiation scars faded but still visible, smiled as she checked her medical scanner, now modified with crystalline memory storage and compatible with every known species biology. The council representatives are already sitting down. They're still not entirely comfortable with all this informality. "They're learning," Thompson replied, gesturing to her latest project. A fusion drive enhanced with Scatheri crystal matrices, capable of matching quantum ships for speed while remaining accessible to primitive engineering. Sometimes you have to go backward to move forward. The chamber filled with delegates as Nova began the ceremony, its crystal structure projecting memories of that first rescue mission. But now those memories were interwoven with hundreds of others. Similar stories of species helping each other, of forgotten technologies finding new purpose, of barriers breaking down between the advanced and the primitive. Emily stepped up to the podium, looking out at the assembled beings. Council members in their quantum suits sat beside engineers from the outer rim colonies. Crystalline Scatheri floated next to organic beings that would once have been deemed too primitive to acknowledge. 5 years ago, we heard a call that everyone else had forgotten to listen for, she began. We answered it not because we were the most advanced, but because we hadn't advanced past caring. Since then, we've learned that civilization isn't measured by the sophistication of our technology, but by how we use whatever technology we have to help others. Nova's light shifted, displaying the changes that had swept the galaxy. The reformed council now included representatives from every technological level. The Interstellar Rescue Service had vessels ranging from quantum ships to retrofitted mining craft, each valuable for different situations. Species that had hidden their innovations for fear of council optimization were now openly sharing their unique approaches to solving universal problems. Today, we're not just opening another cooperation center, Emily continued. We're celebrating a new understanding of progress, one that measures advancement not by how far we've gone, but by how many we brought with us. The chamber's old-fashioned radio receiver crackled to life. Still maintained, still monitored, still vital. A new distress signal from another forgotten corner of space. Without hesitation, representatives from a dozen species moved toward the coordination center, each bringing their own technological perspectives to the rescue operation. Turner watched them go, then turned to Nova. Was this what you imagined when you sent that signal into the darkness? Nova's response filled the chamber with crystalline light, sharing not just memories but feelings. The hope of a child crying out into the void, the joy of being heard, the pride of seeing that moment of connection reshape an entire galaxy. As the rescue team departed, Council quantum ships flying alongside primitive vessels, each bringing their own strengths to the mission. Emily thought about her old coffee mug, still sitting on her desk at the monitoring station. Her daughter's wobbly painted stars had faded, but they remained a perfect reminder of what they'd learned. Sometimes the most important signals came through on the frequencies everyone else had forgotten. Sometimes the most advanced civilization wasn't the one that had gone the furthest, but the one that remembered to look back and help others forward. And sometimes it took a child's cry in the darkness to remind an entire galaxy what it meant to be truly civilized. Nova's light pulsed one final time, broadcasting on all frequencies, quantum and radio alike, a simple message in the mathematical language that had first bridged the gap between species. Thank you for listening.